My name is Lieutenant Colonel Grace Halberg. At 38, I stood in my childhood home in Annapolis, an unwelcome ghost at a party, honoring the man who stole my victory, my brother. My smile was a ceasefire, a calculated pause before the real battle began. Then my stepmother, Deborah, cornered me, her voice a silken blade. "Grace, darling, you're not trying to steal his thunder with that uniform, are you? This is Lucas's day." Her words were a direct hit, a detonation that shattered years of silent endurance. I felt the familiar cold seep into my marrow, but I held her gaze. Have you ever been forced to applaud the person who stole your life's work? They mistook my silence for surrender. They were about to learn that the most dangerous weapon is a woman with nothing left to lose. The thought was a cold, hard stone in my gut. I had rehearsed this moment for the entire 2-day drive from Nevada. My dusty Ford F-150, a stark contrast to the gleaming Mercedes and BMWs that now lined the long gravel driveway. My truck, like me, didn't belong here. This was their world of manicured lawns and quiet old money. The invitation, if you could call it that, was still crumpled in the glove compartment. It had arrived just 3 days prior, an afterthought, a courtesy extended so late it was an insult. I took a deep, steadying breath, the salty air of the Chesapeake Bay filling my lungs. It was the scent of my childhood, a scent now laced with the bitter tang of estrangement. I was not here for the canapés or the polite chatter. I was here to face them. The front door opened into a wave of warmth, laughter, and the soft clinking of glasses. My brother Lucas, the man of the hour, stood near the grand staircase, tall and tanned, accepting congratulations with an easy, practiced charm. He was recounting a story, my story, about a narrow escape in Kandahar, his voice resonating with a bravery he had borrowed. He was a good performer. I had to give him that. That's when Deborah made her move, executing a flawless social maneuver that left me isolated near the roaring fireplace. She held her glass of Chardonnay like a scepter, her smile a perfect polished mask. "Grace, darling," she whispered, her voice a silken blade as she looked me up and down. "You're not trying to steal his thunder with that uniform, are you? This is Lucas's day." The words struck me like shrapnel, stealing the air from my lungs. I felt the familiar cold seep into my marrow, but I held her gaze. My military training took over, face neutral, hands steady. But inside, her words were a detonation, shattering years of silent endurance. She wasn't finished. Seeing a state senator approaching, she placed a proprietary hand on my arm, her touch feeling like a brand. "Senator, you know my stepdaughter, Grace," she said, her tone dripping with false concern. "She does paperwork for the Army out in Nevada. We're so glad she has such a safe job. We're always worrying about her." Paperwork. She had reduced my command, my strategies, the lives I was responsible for, to paperwork. She painted me as a fragile thing they needed to worry about, while Lucas was the hero. The senator gave me a polite, dismissive nod and turned his attention back to her, leaving me standing in the shadow they had so expertly cast. I didn't exist as a soldier, only as a footnote to my brother's story. My eyes scanned the room, searching for my father. I found him holding court by the liquor cabinet, laughing with a retired general. His name was Donald Halberg, and he was the architect of this fiction. As he spoke, he gestured proudly towards Lucas. His eyes swept across the room and passed right over me, not with malice, but with an indifference that was somehow worse. It was as if I were a piece of furniture, a part of the scenery. Then I saw it. On the heavy oak mantelpiece, pride of place, was a large, ornate silver frame. It was a photograph of Lucas and me from my last tour in Afghanistan, both of us in full desert combat gear, squinting against the harsh sun. Or it was a picture of us. My stomach dropped. The photo had been brutally cropped, excising me almost completely, leaving only the edge of my sleeve and a sliver of my shoulder pressed against my brother's side. I was a phantom limb, a remnant they had been too lazy to edit out completely. Below the image, a newly polished brass plaque was affixed to the frame. The engraved words burned themselves into my retinas. Captain Lucas Halberg, architect of Operation Resolute Spear. My blood ran cold. The low hum of the party faded into a distant roar. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was a deliberate act of erasure. They hadn't just ignored my achievements. They had stolen them, retitled them, and mounted them on the wall for all to admire. They had taken my history, the history I had written in dust and sweat and blood, and signed my brother's name to it. That photograph on the mantel wasn't the first time I'd been cut from the frame. In my memory, the edits were just less literal, the excisions carved into moments that should have been my own. Standing there amidst the clinking glasses and forced laughter, the noise of the party faded and the past rolled in like a heavy fog off the Chesapeake. I was transported back to a blazing June day at West Point, the sun beating down on the perfect green of the parade grounds, making the polished brass on our uniforms almost too bright to look at. It was graduation day. 4 years of relentless discipline, of 4 a.m. wake-up calls, of pushing my body and mind to their absolute limits had led to this single, triumphant moment. Dressed in the iconic gray and white, my white gloves crisp and clean, I stood in formation, my gaze sweeping across the sea of cheering families in the bleachers. I searched for them, a desperate childish hope flickering in my chest. I saw my classmates being lifted onto their fathers' shoulders, their mothers weeping with unrestrained joy. I saw siblings holding up handmade signs with goofy, loving insults. I saw nothing for me. The space where my family should have been was a gaping, empty void. My father had called the night before, his voice smooth and professional, as if he were addressing a subordinate. Informed me of an unavoidable client meeting. He said he was proud, of course, but business was business. The words were hollow, a pre-written script he'd likely used before. My stepmother, Deborah, hadn't even bothered with a call. A garish bouquet of white lilies, a flower I've been allergic to since childhood, a fact she surely knew, had arrived at my barracks with a card. Her signature was on it, but the message, a generic "so proud of you," felt like it was written by an assistant. Later, a voicemail would arrive, her voice smooth and impersonal, wishing me well as if I'd just passed a driving test. And Lucas, my brother, my fellow soldier, sent a text. It contained a single solitary word. Congrats. I stood there, a statue in the middle of a celebration, the weight of my diploma feeling impossibly heavy in my hand. The overwhelming sense of accomplishment I had anticipated, the feeling I had dreamed of for 4 years, dissolved into a hollow ache. It was the first and perhaps deepest cut, the stinging realization that the crowning achievement of my life was to my own family an inconvenience, an event not worth changing their schedule for, an accomplishment not worthy of their presence. The memory shifted, the summer heat replaced by the stifling warmth of a Christmas years later. We were all gathered in the formal living room, the air thick with the scent of the towering Douglas fir and my stepmother's expensive cloying potpourri. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow on the perfectly wrapped presents. Lucas, seated in a plush armchair as if on a throne, opened his first. It was a small, heavy box from my father. Inside, nestled on a black velvet cushion, was our grandfather's vintage Rolex, an heirloom, a legacy. My father clapped him on the shoulder, his voice thick with a rare display of emotion. "This belongs to the one who will carry on the Halberg name," he announced to the room, his gaze sweeping over the assembled relatives, pointedly excluding me. Then it was my turn. Deborah handed me a thin, crisp envelope, a bright red symbol of holiday cheer that felt like a mockery. My name was written on the front in her perfect looping script. I opened it. Inside was a $50 Amazon gift card. A suffocating silence fell over the room. Everyone saw it. Everyone understood the chasm between the two gifts. "We thought you'd prefer something practical, Grace," Deborah said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "With your lifestyle, we figured online shopping is probably easiest for you to manage." Practical. That was the word she used to describe my life, my career, my choices. It was a euphemism for unfeminine, unsettled, other. Lucas was given a legacy. I was given a transaction, a $50 acknowledgement that they didn't know me and had no intention of trying. The gift card felt like a severance check, payment for services rendered as a daughter, a clear and final statement of my place in the family hierarchy. I was secondary, an outsider, an afterthought. But amidst that cold, there was one memory that burned with a fierce, protective warmth. It was the memory of my grandmother, Margaret, my father's mother. After that lonely West Point graduation, after the flowers and the one-word text, she was the one who showed up. She drove 8 hours straight from her home in North Carolina without stopping, her old Buick pulling up to my empty barracks just as dusk was settling. She found me sitting on my footlocker, and without a word, she simply hugged me. Then she took me to a small, unassuming diner off the main highway, the kind with cracked red vinyl booths and the constant scent of coffee and fried bacon. It was real. It was honest. She didn't offer platitudes or excuses for them. She ordered us both black coffee and a slice of apple pie a la mode, then reached across the table and took my hand in her own, her grip surprisingly strong. Her eyes, the same clear blue as mine, looked directly into me, seeing past the uniform and the carefully constructed composure. "Don't you ever let them define your worth, Grace," she said, her voice low and steady, cutting through the diner's quiet murmur. "Your light is too bright, and it scares them. They're afraid of being left in the shadows. That's all this is, fear." She wasn't just comforting me, she was arming me. She was the only one who saw the battlefield for what it was. Not some distant desert, but the polished mahogany of our family's dining table. She saw their fear, their jealousy, their calculated dismissals for what they were. Her words were a lifeline, an anchor in the swirling chaos of their indifference. She was the voice that whispered I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. Her voice was the only reason I hadn't shattered into a million pieces long ago. My grandmother's words became my new mission orders. Don't let them define your worth. And so I left. 2 olive-drab duffel bags and my beat-up Ford F-150 were all I took from that Annapolis house. I drove west, leaving the lush green of Maryland behind for the relentless, punishing sun of Arizona. My destination was Fort Huachuca, an intelligence base dropped in the middle of a vast, unforgiving desert. My first apartment was a cramped studio above a 24-hour laundromat. The air was perpetually thick with the chemical sweetness of fabric softener. and the oppressive hum of the machines below. It was all I could afford after paying the security deposit and first month's rent with what little savings I had. Meanwhile, a single phone call from my father had secured Lucas a spacious, furnished apartment in the new officers' housing complex, complete with a swimming pool and a view of the mountains. My view was a gravel parking lot. My father never called to see if I had arrived safely. This was my punishment for my stubborn streak, as he called it. He was waiting for me to fail, to come crawling back and admit that I couldn't survive without the Halberg name propping me up. Every evening after a grueling day on base, I'd sit on an overturned cardboard box that served as my only furniture, eating instant ramen noodles straight from the cup. I'd stare out at the endless expanse of desert, the sky turning a bruised purple at dusk, and a cold sliver of doubt would creep in. Had I made a terrible mistake? But then I would remember the look on his face, the dismissive wave of his hand, and I knew I couldn't go back. I would rather starve in this desert than suffocate in their gilded cage. On base, I quickly learned that my name was both a blessing and a curse. My new commanding officer, Colonel Miller, was an old friend of my father's. He saw Halberg on my file and looked at me with an immediate, deep-seated skepticism, as if I were a fraud he was honor-bound to expose. I had to work twice as hard as any man on my team just to be considered half as good. The tactical plans I spent nights developing were often met with a non-committal grunt. "We'll take it under advisement, Lieutenant," Miller would say, tossing my report onto a pile of other papers. A week later, a male colleague would present a strikingly similar idea in a meeting, rephrased in his own confident baritone, and be met with enthusiastic praise. "Excellent initiative, Johnson," Miller would boom. I learned to work in silence. I stopped offering my best ideas in open forums. Instead, I poured them into my official reports, creating a meticulous paper trail. I volunteered for the assignments no one else wanted. The graveyard shift analyzing drone surveillance footage until my eyes burned. Holiday duty inventory checks in sweltering warehouses. My meals became whatever I could eat at my desk, a Cliff Bar and bitter black coffee from the break room pot. I did not complain. I channeled the resentment, the stinging injustice, and turned it into fuel. I would make myself so undeniably excellent that they could no longer ignore me. One night, I was pushing my 36th consecutive hour awake, deep diving into encrypted enemy communications for a critical report. My world had shrunk to the green glow of the monitor. Exhaustion was a physical weight pressing down on me. As I reached for my coffee mug, my hand trembled and the scalding liquid sloshed over my wrist. A searing pain shot up my arm, but there was no time to react. I gasped, swore under my breath, and wrapped my hand in a wad of rough paper towels from the dispenser. Then I turned back to the screen. The report was more important than the pain. The next morning, I placed the finished report on Miller's desk. He glanced at it, then at me, his eyes empty of acknowledgement. "All right, Halberg, leave it there," was all he said. No thank you, no recognition of the work. That night, back in my sweltering apartment, the constant hum of the dryers below felt like a taunt. I unwrapped the paper towels. A nasty weeping blister had formed across my wrist. And in the stark silence of that room, I finally broke. The tears weren't for the searing pain of the burn. They were for the profound, crushing loneliness. There was no one to call, no one to bring me an ice pack, no one to tell me it would be okay. The blister was a perfect, painful symbol of my new reality. On this road, I was utterly alone. Every wound, big or small, I would have to heal myself. After a night spent in the depths of a lonely despair, the desert sun felt unusually harsh the next morning. I was in the main conference room before dawn, the silence of the base a stark contrast to the turmoil in my mind. I focused on my work, letting the complex data on the screen be my refuge. The first person to break through the wall I had built around myself was the one I least expected. He wasn't a friend of my father's. He wasn't part of the old boys network. He was Brigadier General Rowe, a second-generation Korean American, with kind, intelligent eyes and a reputation for being tough but fair. He walked into the room at 0500 hours, saw me hunched over my laptop, and instead of walking past, he paused. A few minutes later, he returned and placed a steaming ceramic mug on the table beside me. The warmth seeped through the porcelain into my cold hands. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "I read your analysis of the enemy supply routes last night. It was brilliant. You saw a pattern that my entire team missed." I looked up, stunned into silence. For months, my work had been either ignored or stolen. To have it not only seen, but understood and praised, by a general no less, felt surreal. That simple mug of black coffee, offered without fanfare or expectation, held more warmth and genuine respect than every hollow compliment my family had ever given me. I could only manage a choked, "Thank you, sir." From that day forward, General Rowe became a quiet mentor. He didn't make a show of it, but he started including me in high-level briefings. He would specifically ask for my opinion, forcing the other officers in the room to listen. He was giving me a platform not because of my last name, but in spite of it. He was the first ray of light. The second came on a lonely Thursday in November. It was Thanksgiving Day, a holiday I had come to dread. Back home, it was a grand affair, filled with people I barely knew, and the suffocating pressure of my family's expectations. Here, it was just another day. I had already resigned myself to a dinner of a frozen Stuffer's lasagna and the silence of my apartment. Then there was a knock on my door. It was Master Sergeant Maria Torres, a sharp, no-nonsense NCO from my unit, a formidable woman I respected immensely. She stood there in civilian clothes, a colorful apron tied around her waist. "Lieutenant Colonel," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "My husband made way too much turkey. You're not spending the holiday alone. Get your coat." I started to protest, to say I was fine, that I had work to do. But she just shook her head, a small, genuine smile on her face. "That wasn't a request, ma'am." I let her lead me to her small, tidy home on the other side of the base. The moment I stepped inside, I was enveloped by the sounds and smells I didn't realize I had been starving for. The chaotic laughter of her 3 children, the savory aroma of roasting turkey and stuffing, and the sweet, spicy scent of pumpkin pie cooling on the counter. Her husband, a kind-faced civilian contractor, shook my hand warmly. Their kids showed me their Lego creations. They didn't ask about my family or my past. They just pulled up a chair for me at their crowded table, passed me the mashed potatoes, and included me. As I sat there listening to them argue good-naturedly over the best part of the Macy's parade, a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the food. For the first time in years, I felt what a family was supposed to feel like on Thanksgiving. Slowly, almost without me noticing, a new kind of family began to form around me. It wasn't one of blood, but of shared purpose and mutual respect. It was General Rowe, who saw my mind. It was Maria, who saw my loneliness. It was a handful of other soldiers on my team who had seen my work ethic and had come to trust my judgment. They were the ones who stayed late with me, who brought me food when I forgot to eat, who listened when the pressure became too much. One Friday night, after a particularly grueling 2-week field exercise, we all ended up at a local dive bar just off base. The kind of place with sticky floors, a jukebox playing classic rock, and cheap pitchers of beer. We were all exhausted, grimy but relieved. We sat around a rickety table, devouring baskets of spicy buffalo wings and greasy onion rings. General Rowe raised his plastic cup of beer. The noisy bar seemed to quiet down around our table. "To the brains of the operation," he said, looking directly at me. And all at once, every single person at that table, officers and enlisted alike, raised their cups and glasses towards me. "To Grace," someone shouted. "Hooah!" another one yelled. They clinked their cups against mine. In that moment, surrounded by the smell of stale beer and fried food, I felt more seen, more valued, more celebrated than I ever had in the perfect, pristine living room of my father's house. Their light, genuine, and unwavering was finally helping me see my own. The warmth of that night at the bar, the feeling of camaraderie, and genuine respect felt like a lifetime ago, the moment my phone rang a week later. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from Maryland. A cold knot of apprehension tightened in my stomach. For 2 years there had been nothing but silence from them. Silence I had mistaken for peace. I answered. "Grace?" His voice was so unfamiliar, so different from the harsh, dismissive tone I remembered. It was unnaturally warm, almost syrupy. It was my father. "Grace, I was just talking to General Fitzwilliam. He told me you've been doing exceptional work out there. I just wanted to call and say, I'm proud of you." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. "I'm proud of you." The 4 words I had longed to hear my entire life. My guard, so carefully constructed, wavered for a fraction of a second. A foolish, desperate part of me, the little girl still seeking her father's approval, wanted to believe him. But the seasoned intelligence officer in me knew better. This wasn't a call. It was an opening move in a strategic campaign. He didn't wait long to reveal his objective. "Listen, the reason I'm calling, Lucas is up for a major command position, a huge opportunity for him. But he needs a truly impressive strategic plan to seal the deal. The first person I thought of was you. Nobody in the family has a mind for this like you do, Grace." And there it was, the bait. The praise wasn't for me. It was a tool to get something from me. He wasn't proud of my success. He saw it as a resource to be exploited for my brother. The familiar, chilling disappointment washed over me, extinguishing the tiny flicker of hope. I told him I would think about it, my voice colder than I intended. The full court press began the next day. An email from Lucas appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simply, "Hey." Inside there was a vague 1-page outline of the mission parameters and a short message. "Hey Grace, Dad said you might help out with this. You know I'm not great with the fine details. Let me know what you come up with." L. Not a request, but an expectation, as if it were my duty to do his work for him, to once again be the ghostwriter of his success. The casual entitlement of it all made my jaw clench. Then came the call from Deborah. Her voice was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, laced with guilt and false urgency. "Grace, darling," she began, "your father told me about the wonderful opportunity for Lucas. This is so important for the family, you understand. A Halberg in a command position like that. It elevates us all. If you help him succeed, it reflects well on everyone." She paused, letting the implication hang in the air. This isn't the time to be selfish, dear. We all need to pull together. Selfish. The word was a calculated strike, designed to shame me into compliance. To deny their request would be framed as me actively sabotaging the family's future. They were packaging their blatant exploitation in the language of love and loyalty, twisting family duty into a weapon against me. They wanted me to step back into the shadows, to use my mind and my skills to ensure that Lucas, the golden child, could continue to shine. The final act of this theatrical performance came a week later. My father flew all the way to Arizona. He didn't ask to see my cramped apartment or the base where I worked. He called and invited me to dinner at the steakhouse, the most expensive old-school restaurant in town. The kind with dark wood paneling, white tablecloths, and waiters in black vests. The kind of place he took important clients, never his daughter. The meal was a tense affair. He made small talk, asking superficial questions about my work, his eyes scanning the room more than they ever met mine. Then, as the waiter cleared our main courses, he made his move. He leaned forward, covering my hand with his. His skin was dry and cool. "Grace," he said, his voice a low, confidential murmur. "I know I haven't always been fair to you. I see that now. You have a gift, a brilliant mind." He squeezed my hand. "Help Lucas this one time, just this once. I promise you, after this is over, things will be different. I will make it my mission to see that you get the recognition you deserve. I'll make some calls. I will personally ensure that everyone knows what you're capable of." It was a perfect speech. It had contrition, praise, and a promise for the future. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw nothing, no remorse, no genuine pride. I saw only the cold, hard calculation of a lawyer closing a deal. This wasn't an apology, it was a negotiation. He was trying to buy my talent with a promise he had no intention of keeping. In that moment, under the dim, expensive lighting of the restaurant, the shadow of my family fell over me once more. It wasn't a shadow of protection or love. It was a suffocating darkness, one that threatened to extinguish the very light they now sought to use. After that dinner, I sent my father a polite, professionally worded email. I told him that due to my current operational tempo, I would be unable to assist with Captain Halberg's strategic planning. I used military jargon. I was firm, respectful, and final. I told him no. The retaliation was swifter and more brutal than I could have imagined. 3 weeks later, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. No subject, no sender I recognized, just a single ominous link. My training screamed at me not to click it, but a cold dread told me I had to. The link led to a well-respected military affairs blog, The Dispatch. The headline read, "Inside Operation Hawthorne: How One Captain's Bold Strategy Saved a Battalion." My breath caught in my throat. Operation Hawthorne. That was mine. A complex, high-stakes counterinsurgency mission I had commanded in a remote valley in Afghanistan a year ago. A mission that had been classified until recently. My mission. My hands trembled as I scrolled down. The article was detailed, quoting declassified reports about the audacious flanking maneuver, the precision drone strikes, the psychological warfare components. All the signature elements I had painstakingly designed and executed. It praised the commander's uncommon valor and strategic genius. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I scrolled faster, my eyes scanning for the name, for the official credit. And then I saw it. Under a subheading titled "The Commander," there was a picture of Lucas, smiling confidently in his dress uniform. The text read, "The mission was commanded by then Captain Lucas Halberg, whose leadership on the ground was instrumental to its success. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a typo. It was a lie, printed in black and white for the entire world to see. They hadn't just tried to steal my future. They had reached back in time and stolen my past. They had ripped a page out of my service record, a page written with the lives of my soldiers on the line, and pasted my brother's face over it. The rage was a physical thing, a hot, blinding surge that left me dizzy. I snatched my phone and dialed my father's number, my fingers clumsy with fury. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and composed. "Why?" The word was torn from my throat, a ragged, strangled sound. I was beyond reason, beyond military composure. "Why did you do it?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line, a silence so profound it was an admission in itself. When he finally spoke, the manufactured warmth was gone, replaced by the ice-cold venom of his true self. "Grace, be realistic," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Lucas's career needed this. It's a competitive world. His record needed a significant commendation to put him on the command track. "And what about my record?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What about my career? It was my command." "Your record is fine," he said dismissively. "But let's be honest with ourselves. You're a woman in the Army. You've done well, exceptionally well, but there's a ceiling. You were never going to reach the top ranks. A man will, Lucas will." This was the best strategic move for the family. The best strategic move. The phone almost slipped from my grasp. It was worse than a lie. It was a justification, a philosophy. He wasn't just admitting to the theft. He was explaining its cold, hard logic. He was telling me that my gender was a permanent disqualifier, that my ambition, my talent, my sacrifices, they were all capped by an invisible barrier that made my accomplishments expendable and his son's potential limitless. He wasn't just stealing my victory, he was telling me I was unworthy of it in the first place. It was a slap in the face so profound, so utterly dismissive of my entire existence that it knocked the breath from my lungs. I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I simply let my hand fall away, the device clattering onto the cheap laminate floor. My legs wouldn't hold me. I began to pace the small confines of my apartment, back and forth, a caged animal. 4 walls, 4 years at West Point, 10 years of service, late nights, early mornings, missed holidays, the burn on my wrist, the lonely Thanksgiving, the constant grinding effort to be twice as good just to be seen as equal. All of it, every sacrifice, erased by a blog post and the casual, cruel ambition of my own family. I stopped in front of the small bathroom mirror. I saw a woman I barely recognized. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed and hollow, with a pain so deep it felt ancient. But as I stared into those eyes, something shifted. The despair, the crushing weight of betrayal, began to burn away, consumed by something else. A wildfire of fury, a cold, clear, and absolute rage. They had taken my past. They had tried to dictate my future. They had devalued my present. They had left me with nothing. And that was their fatal mistake. A soldier with nothing to lose is the most dangerous soldier of all. I took a deep, shuddering breath, and the woman in the mirror stood taller. The trembling stopped. The tears dried. The pain receded, replaced by a crystalline focus. They thought I would endure this in silence, just as I had endured everything else. They were wrong. "You will pay for this," I whispered, my voice a low, steady promise to the reflection in the glass. "All of you. Everyone has a breaking point, a line drawn in the sand that, once crossed, changes everything." It's that moment when the cost of silence becomes greater than the cost of the fight. The moment you realize that your own dignity is more important than a false peace. Tell me, what was your breaking point? What was the moment that made you finally say, enough? Share your story in the comments. Your voice gives me strength. And in the next chapter, we're going to see exactly what happens when that strength is finally unleashed. The wildfire of fury subsided, banking into hot, glowing embers of resolve. The emotional storm gave way to the cold, clear focus of an intelligence officer. My mission was no longer on foreign soil, it was here, and every mission begins with gathering intel. I knew that official military records, especially those at a classified level, couldn't be altered without leaving a trace. My father, for all his legal cunning, was a civilian. He didn't understand the digital fingerprints left behind in secure systems. I did. For the next 48 hours, I barely slept. Fueled by black coffee and a grim determination, I used every cyber forensic skill I possessed. I wasn't just a soldier, I was a trained analyst. I navigated the labyrinth of the Pentagon's secure archives, my fingers flying across the keyboard, executing complex command line queries. My heart hammered a steady, rhythmic beat against my ribs, not with fear, but with the thrill of the hunt. And then, at 3 a.m. on the second night, I found it. The administrative log for the files pertaining to Operation Hawthorne. The metadata didn't lie. It was a perfect, incorruptible timeline. It showed the original after-action report, file name AR Op Hawthorne 253 Invictone 22415 Halberg G, submitted by me on the correct date. And then it showed another entry, dated 5 months later, a modification, an administrator-level override. My breath hitched as I traced the origin of the command. The IP address wasn't from a .mil domain. It wasn't from the Pentagon or any military installation. I ran a quick trace. The address resolved to a commercial server registered to a private entity. A sick feeling of dread and triumph washed over me as the name appeared on my screen in stark white letters. Halberg and Associates, LLC. My father, from his own law firm's server. It wasn't a conspiracy involving high-ranking officers. It was a simple domestic act of treachery. A wave of something akin to nauseous elation shot through me. This was it, the digital smoking gun. The proof was irrefutable, but a log file wasn't enough. I needed something more tangible, something undeniable. I needed the original document. Years of training had instilled in me a deep-seated paranoia, a habit of personal redundancy. I never trusted a single system. I backed up everything. I went to the old, battered footlocker at the back of my closet, the one that had followed me from base to base. I lifted the heavy lid, the smell of canvas and old leather filling the air. Underneath a neatly folded dress uniform and my old field manuals, there it was, a small black encrypted external hard drive, my personal archive. My hands were steady as I plugged it into my laptop. I typed in the long, complex passphrase, a combination of my grandmother's birthday and the coordinates of my first command post. The drive word to life. I navigated to the correct folder, and there, sitting untouched for over a year, was the file named exactly as it appeared in the original log. I clicked it open. My original report appeared on the screen, exactly as I had written it. My digital signature was at the bottom. My tactical maps, with my own handwriting in the margins, were all there. And most importantly, so was Appendix C, a detailed 12-page analysis of the last-minute flanking maneuver on the southern ridge, the decisive move that had broken the enemy's line and saved the entire battalion. The move Lucas didn't even know I had authorized until after it was over. I had my weapon. I immediately began creating multiple secure backups on different cloud servers on a new thumb drive. They would never be able to erase this again. As I was uploading the final file, my phone buzzed. It was General Rowe. "Grace," he said, his voice grim. "I just read an article about Lucas being credited for Hawthorne. It's a load of bullshit, and you and I both know it. The entire 3rd Battalion knows who was on the radio that day. We know whose orders we were following." He paused. "I was there. I'll testify to it in a heartbeat. If you need a witness, you have one. I'll say it under oath in front of any board of inquiry." His words were the final piece of ammunition I needed. The confirmation that I wasn't fighting a ghost. I wasn't alone. I let out a slow breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The cold resolve in my veins solidified into ice. "Thank you, General," I said, my voice eerily calm. "I appreciate that more than you know, but I don't think I'll need a courtroom." I paused, looking at the files arrayed on my screen, my arsenal. I'll be settling this on a different kind of stage. The stage was set at West Point. The Eisenhower Hall Theater was packed with cadets in their full dress gray, decorated officers, influential alumni, and military press. The very air hummed with tradition and prestige. This was the place where I had graduated alone, an invisible woman in a sea of celebrated men. Today I would not be invisible. I arrived not as a guest, but as a commander entering a battlefield. This time I wasn't alone. My grandmother Margaret walked beside me, her posture regal, her presence an undeniable force. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue dress, a pearl necklace at her throat. She was my reinforcement. As expected, my name was not on the guest list at the main entrance. A young, nervous-looking captain stepped forward to block our path, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, I don't seem to have your name here." Before I could speak, my grandmother met his gaze with an unblinking stare that could have frozen steel. "Captain," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an authority that made him straighten his spine. "Look closely at the rank insignia on her shoulder. That is Lieutenant Colonel Grace Halberg. She has more right to be in this hall than anyone on your list. Now, are you going to step aside, or do we need to have a conversation with your commanding officer?" The young captain paled, stammered an apology, and practically tripped over himself to let us pass. A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd in the lobby as they saw us. I could feel their eyes on me, on my uniform, on the determined set of my jaw. We didn't stop to mingle. We walked with purpose, straight into the main auditorium. The front row was reserved, a small, tasteful sign, reading "Reserved for the Halberg family," placed on the end seat. My father, my stepmother, and Lucas were already seated, soaking in the atmosphere. Deborah's face, wreathed in a triumphant smile, froze when she saw us. My father's expression tightened into a mask of disbelief. I walked down the aisle, the sound of my low heels clicking deliberately on the polished floor. I stopped at their row. Without a word, I met my father's gaze, then sat down in the empty seat right next to him. My grandmother sat beside me. Checkmate. The game had begun. The ceremony started. Speeches were made. Praises were sung. And then it was Lucas's turn. He walked to the podium, the very picture of a modern American hero. He was handsome, confident, and utterly fraudulent. He began his speech, his voice smooth and practiced, recounting tales of valor from Operation Hawthorne. My tales. He spoke of the difficult decision to execute the flanking maneuver, a decision I had made while he was miles away. He talked about the innovative use of psychological operations, a strategy I had designed over sleepless nights. Behind him, on a massive projection screen, a slideshow began. The first image was a tactical map of the Hawthorne Valley. It was a map I knew intimately. I had drawn the initial overlays myself. He used a laser pointer to trace the routes, his words a perfect echo of my own from the original mission briefing. I felt a cold, calm fury settle over me. And then my own quiet counteroffensive began. At the bottom right corner of the map, a line of text appeared, small but clear. Strategic Architect, LTCG Halberg. A low murmur rippled through the front half of the auditorium. Lucas, caught mid-sentence, faltered. His eyes darted to the screen, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. He tried to recover, to ignore it, moving on to the next phase of his story. The slide changed to a complex flowchart detailing the threat escalation protocols. And there it was again. At the bottom, Final Field Authorization, G. Halberg. The murmuring grew louder. It was no longer just a few people. It was a wave of confused whispers. On stage, Lucas was visibly flustered. The confident flow of his speech broke. He started to stammer, losing his place in the narrative he had memorized but never truly understood. His eyes shot to the side of the stage, searching for the tech crew, a desperate, panicked look on his face. He knew he was losing control. My father's face was ashen, his knuckles white where he gripped the armrest. Deborah looked like she had swallowed poison. Just as Lucas's silence on stage became painfully awkward, General Rowe, who was scheduled to give the final commendation, stood up and walked to the secondary microphone on the stage. He was calm, his presence commanding, the immediate attention of the entire hall. The whispers died down instantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Rowe began, his voice deep and resonant, filling the silent auditorium. "Please forgive the interruption. It appears we have a clerical error in the program that I feel compelled to correct for the official record." He let the words hang in the air, a masterful pause that drew every eye in the room. Lucas stood frozen at the podium, a deer in the headlights. "The tactical brilliance of Operation Hawthorne has been rightfully praised tonight," the general continued, his gaze sweeping across the audience. "The courage of the soldiers on the ground was second to none. But the true architect of that victory, the commander who designed the strategy and bore the ultimate responsibility for its execution, is sitting with us here today." The silence in the hall was absolute. It was so quiet I could hear the hum of the stage lights. General Rowe turned slightly, his eyes finding mine in the front row. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. "So I ask you all to please stand," he declared, his voice rising with power, "as we properly and officially recognize the true commanding officer of Operation Hawthorne, a genuine hero and one of the finest strategic minds in the United States Army, Lieutenant Colonel Grace Halberg." For a heartbeat there was nothing, and then the entire auditorium erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was a thunderous, roaring ovation, a spontaneous wave of respect and acknowledgement that washed over me. The entire corps of cadets was on its feet, the officers, the alumni. They all stood, their hands coming together in a powerful, unified sound. Camera flashes exploded from the press section, creating a constellation of blinding white lights. Slowly, my grandmother's hand on my arm, I rose to my feet. I turned and looked at my family. Lucas was paralyzed, his face a mask of pale, humiliated shock. Deborah stared straight ahead, her perfect facade shattered. And my father looked old and defeated. In that moment, under the full, unfiltered glare of the spotlight, he finally understood. They had lost. I held their gaze for a long moment, letting them see me, truly see me, for the first time. Not as the afterthought, not as the supporting character, but as the commander of my own story, standing in the center of the stage that was rightfully mine. The thunderous applause faded, replaced by the suffocating silence of a private waiting room backstage. The adrenaline that had coursed through my veins moments before now receded, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. General Rowe had arranged for us to use this room, a courtesy to avoid the press. It was a sterile, impersonal space, but it would serve as the final battlefield. They were escorted in a few minutes later, no longer a proud, unified front, but 3 separate, defeated individuals. My grandmother Margaret stood silently by the door, a stoic guardian ensuring this confrontation would be uninterrupted. Deborah spoke first, her face a mess of crocodile tears and ruined makeup. The performance wasn't over yet. "How could you, Grace?" she sobbed, her voice thick with manufactured anguish. "How could you do this to your family, in front of everyone?" The humiliation. I looked at her, my expression unreadable. The emotional appeals that once worked on me were now useless. "Family?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Is that what we are? A family doesn't systematically erase one of its own to elevate another. A family doesn't commit fraud to protect a fragile ego." I slid a neatly printed copy of the server logs across the polished table. It landed in front of her with a soft, definitive sound. "This wasn't a mistake, Deborah. This was a conspiracy, and you were a part of it." Her crying stopped instantly. Her eyes darted to the paper, saw the name of my father's law firm, and her face went slack with genuine shock. She had no more lines in this play. My father stepped forward, his face a grim mask. He tried to reclaim control, falling back on the one thing he had left, bluster. "This is a disgrace," he hissed. "You have dishonored the Halberg name." A short, bitter laugh escaped my lips. "The Halberg name?" I met his furious gaze without flinching. "You talk about honor? Your honor died the day you decided my accomplishments were yours to give away. It died the moment you put your son's ambition ahead of your daughter's truth." He opened his mouth to argue, but I held up a hand, silencing him. The power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted. I was in command now. Lucas was the last one. He didn't even try to come into the room. I found him later, standing outside by the parade grounds, the place where it had all begun. A cold, steady drizzle had started to fall, soaking the shoulders of his dress uniform. He looked small, defeated. The golden boy facade had crumbled, leaving behind a man I barely recognized. "Grace," he mumbled, not looking at me. "I'm sorry." "Sorry for what, Lucas?" I asked, my voice devoid of anger, only a vast, weary sadness. "Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught?" He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a pathetic mixture of shame and self-pity. "I was a coward," he whispered, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "I was afraid that if everyone knew how brilliant you were, I'd just disappear. I wouldn't matter." I looked at my brother, the man I had once idolized, the one I had protected my whole life. And I felt nothing. The hatred, the rage, it was all gone, replaced by a profound sense of pity. He wasn't a monster. He was just weak. "Forgiveness isn't something I can just give you, Lucas," I said quietly. "It's something you have to earn. You can start by returning what isn't yours." I didn't wait for a reply. I turned my back on him and walked away, leaving him alone with his conscience and the cold November rain. I went back to the waiting room to collect my grandmother. My father and Deborah were still there, standing in stunned silence. This was the final debriefing. "From this day forward," I said, my voice clear and final, each word a carefully placed stone, building a new wall between us. "The name Halberg is, to me, nothing more than a name on a birth certificate. It is not my family. It is not my identity." I looked at my father, then at his wife. "Do not call me. Do not write. Do not try to find me. Our relationship, whatever was left of it, ended the moment you decided I wasn't good enough because I was a woman." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The quiet finality of the words was more powerful than any shout could ever be. I turned, took my grandmother's arm, and we walked out of the room, out of the theater, and out into the clean, rain-washed air. I took a deep breath. The air was cold and sharp in my lungs. It felt like the first real breath I had taken in years. There was a dull ache of loss, the grief for a family I had wished for but never truly had. But that ache was overshadowed by an immense, exhilarating sense of liberation. The weight of their expectations, their disappointments, their betrayals, it was gone. For the first time in my life, I was no longer chained to their shadow. I was free. The freedom I felt walking out of that hall was vast, almost terrifying in its limitlessness. For so long my life had been defined by the fight against my family's narrative. Now that fight was over. But freedom without purpose is just another kind of prison. I knew I couldn't just return to my life as it was. The victory at West Point wasn't an ending. It had to be a beginning. The story of what happened in Eisenhower Hall sent shockwaves through the military community. I was inundated with messages, some from old colleagues, many from strangers. But I didn't want to be a symbol of retribution. I wanted to be a catalyst for change. With the wise counsel of my grandmother and the logistical support of General Rowe, I channeled the energy of that moment into action. We established a foundation. We gave it a name that was both an honor and a defiant act of reclamation: the Margaret Halberg Initiative for Women in Defense. At the official launch event in Washington, D.C., held in a room filled with aspiring female cadets, seasoned officers, and supportive congresswomen, I stood at a podium once more. This time, I wasn't fighting for my own story. I was fighting for theirs. I looked out at the sea of bright, determined faces, and I saw myself in every single one of them. Legacy, I told them, my voice steady, is not something you inherit. It's something you build, brick by painful brick. Your name doesn't define you, your actions do. I paused, letting the words sink in. The name Halberg was once, for me, a symbol of a ceiling I was told I could never break. Today, we make it a symbol of the tools we will use to shatter those ceilings for everyone. The name that was once my prison had become my platform. In the months that followed, I found a quieter, more personal way to heal. I started writing. At first, it was just notes, fragments of memory. But soon it became a mission of its own. I wrote my memoir, a process that felt like a final battle with the ghosts of my past. I confronted every painful memory, every slight, every moment of despair, not as a victim recounting her wounds, but as a survivor mapping her scars. I gave the book a title that my grandmother had inspired years ago in that diner: Command Without Permission. To my astonishment, the book became a national bestseller, but the true impact wasn't in the sales figures, it was in the letters. They arrived by the thousands from all across the country. They were from men and women, soldiers and civilians, who had also felt like the forgotten child, the overlooked employee, The Unappreciated Spouse. A retired factory worker from Ohio wrote that my story gave him the courage to finally confront his brother, who had cheated him out of their father's business. A young female lawyer in Chicago said she read a passage from my book to her partners. Before successfully arguing for her promotion, I read every letter, often with tears in my eyes. They were stories of quiet resilience, of everyday injustices faced with newfound courage. I realized my war had not been mine alone. It had been the silent, private war of countless others. In sharing my story, I had found a community. In their stories, I found the final pieces of my own healing. A year later, I found myself back at West Point. The circle was now complete. The crisp autumn air was filled with the sounds of the military band and the proud shouts of families. This time, I was not a solitary graduate searching for a familiar face. I was on the reviewing stand, the honored guest speaker for the graduating class. I stood at the podium looking out at the long gray line of cadets, a sea of impeccable uniforms and hopeful futures. This was the very spot where I had once stood, invisible and heartbroken. As I delivered my address, speaking not of tactics or war but of integrity and the courage to define one's own honor, my eyes scanned the crowd, and I saw him. Standing near the back, partially obscured by an old oak tree, was Lucas. He was in civilian clothes, a simple polo shirt and slacks. He was no longer a soldier, he just stood there, listening. When I finished and the applause began, he applauded too. Our eyes met across the field for a brief, fleeting moment. There was no animosity, no grand reconciliation. There was only a quiet, unspoken acknowledgement. He wasn't clapping for me, his sister. He was clapping for what I now represented. And in that there was a strange, peaceful kind of closure. After the speeches, my final duty was to present the commissioning certificate to one of the top graduating cadets. As I called her name, a young woman strode onto the stage, her back ramrod straight, her eyes blazing with the same fire I remembered having in my own. As I pinned the gold bars of a second lieutenant onto her uniform, I leaned in and whispered, "Never ask for permission to lead." She looked at me, a flash of understanding in her eyes, and a determined smile touched her lips. "No, ma'am," she said, "I won't." I stepped back, a feeling of profound contentment settling over me. I had found my purpose. It wasn't in the battles I had won, but in the future leaders I could help forge. My dawn was not given to me. I made it myself.